When Meike first announced they were making cinema lenses for Super 35 and full frame, I have to admit I was dubious. On T-Stop Gear we've previously reviewed their lenses for Micro Four Thirds, and although we found them excellent, there's a world of difference between making a lens for Micro Four Thirds and for large format. There are plenty of expensive, full-frame 135 cinema primes, but the budget end of the market has been dominated by adapted photography glass, modded with focus gears and declicked apertures, or if you wanted an off-the-shelf solution, Samyang and Rokinon cinema primes. With these new 135 full-frame cinema lenses from Meike, I had two questions. One, would they be any good? And two, was there any space for them in the market? Compared to the Meike Micro Four Third lenses, these are a serious step up in quality. The focus in particular is extremely smooth, and the aperture, which is stepless, isn't as smooth, but is still very impressive. The markings on the lens are clear and bright, which is vital given the lens's 330-degree focus throw. One of the more obvious issues with the lens is the focus rotation goes well beyond infinity. This isn't a small lens measuring 90mm by 120 and weighing 1100 grams. Other mounts are a little longer, closer to 130mm. The size and weight of these lenses, however, is comparable to other modern cinema lenses with full-frame 135 coverage. The lens kit also includes a small support bracket, which will be useful for taking the strain off mirrorless mounts. I think most people will be using this lens with a matte box, but if you do want to use screw-on filters, the lens has an 82mm front thread. One of the most obvious complaints of the Meike Micro Primes is that they were designed only for mirrorless mounts, making them unusable for shooters using EF and PL cameras. The 50mm, however, comes in Arri PL, Canon EF and RF, Sony E, Leica L, and Nikon Z. Now for me, EF and PL seem the most logical mounts, as they can be adapted to most other systems using a simple adapter. One of the 50mm strengths is how well it controls both flaring and breathing. Even a very bright light aimed directly at the front element produces nicely controlled flares with only a small drop in contrast. By comparison, the Meike 35 and 50mm Micro Four Third primes are both prone to flaring unless used with a matte box. Breathing is very well controlled, and the transitions between focus are smooth. Wide open, the lens is a little creamy, but not overly soft and bloomy like some vintage lenses. If you're a fan of shallow depth of field, this is the lens for you. Like most lenses, the 50mm sharpens up when stopped down, but thanks to the 11-bladed aperture, it has consistently round bokeh at all T-stops. Overall, the look is clean and modern, with very little chromatic aberration, again a distinct improvement when compared to the Micro Four Third primes. It's possible to match this lens with some vintage glass, like Zeiss contacts, but there are still some very obvious differences, specifically less chromatic aberration, certainly wide open, and much cleaner bokeh. The 50mm large illumination circle not only covers full-frame 135, but almost covers a medium format sensor like the Alexa 65. So on full-frame 135, the images are clean, right across the frame, with little to no edge drop-off. However, use of this lens isn't restricted to just cameras with full-frame 135 sensors. It works equally well on both Super 35 and Micro Four Third cameras, although on each of those systems, 50mm is an increasingly telephoto focal length. The obvious reason to buy one of these or the new Meike Super 35 lenses is future-proofing, as they cover a much larger sensor. But it's worth remembering the EF version of this lens can be speed boosted, and if you're using it with an adapter, you can lock that to your cage or rig, and in doing so remove some of the wobble associated with mirrorless mounts. All this said, the original Meike Mini Primes are much lighter, smaller and cheaper, and so for some people they still will make a lot of sense. The lens has great build quality, certainly at the price point. The gearing is smooth and solid, and the markings are clear. The images are bright and clean, without being overly clinical. Flaring, chromatic aberration and breathing are all well controlled, while still retaining some character. It has great coverage even on very large sensors, with little to no edge drop-off thanks to the large illumination circle. But for me, being available on EF and specifically PL is huge, as that allows you to use this lens on almost any camera system. At 1100 grams, the Meike 50mm is not a lightweight lens. Once you have a case of these lenses, you could be looking at 6+ kilograms. so this might be an issue for some, especially if they're used to shooting with much lighter photography glass. But this is part of the trade-off. If people want or need cinema lenses with full-frame 135 coverage, with little to no focus breathing and chromatic aberration, on EF or PL, the size of the lenses will increase, and with it, the weight. Another issue at the moment is that there are only 3 focal lengths in the full-frame 135 range. This 50mm, the 35, and the brand new 85mm. Meike have laid out a roadmap for releasing additional focal lengths, but it will be a few months before anyone can own a full kit. Many people were reluctant to invest in the Meike micro primes due to their coverage and the limitations of a mirrorless mount. Now these new lenses not only solve that problem, but they also deliver better build and optics. I can see them taking a bite out of both the vintage and the Samyang market, simply as they offer a more reliable solution in the same budget area. And with the ever-increasing price of some of the more famous vintage lenses, the Meike full-frame 135 lenses will soon be a more affordable option. These lenses aren't for everyone. Some will want more of a look, and that is where vintage lenses will still hold their own. Others might want an even more pro build quality. But these lenses will fit a lot of people's needs and budgets. And so I'm excited to see more focal lengths, especially the wider angles, later this year.